Good morning and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for Incremental Updates, Better ROI. Fix your website without a full redesign. I'm your host, Jim Brophy, Group Director of Digital here at Northwoods. Every website hits a point where small usability issues start piling up. A confusing nav here, a slow loading page there, a form that nobody finishes. Left unaddressed, those little problems compound until the whole site feels outdated and a full redesign starts to look like the only fix. Sometimes it's smaller than you think. For instance, one incorrect link in a footer can quietly break navigation on hundreds of pages before anybody notices. So this morning we'll take a look at a smarter, more sustainable path forward towards incremental updates. Rather than waiting years for a major overhaul, we'll show how small strategic changes made on a regular basis, guided by the data you're probably already collecting through tools like Google Analytics, Search Console, and heat maps, can improve results for your users and your business without the cost or disruption of starting over. You'll walk away this morning understanding why ongoing improvements often outperform one-time redesigns in impact and ROI, how to tell a routine update from an early warning sign of a bigger problem, and which metrics and users' behaviors are worth tracking to gauge the real health of your site. This session is built for website content and business owners looking to get more out of the site they already have. Our trail guide this morning will be our UX research lead, Caitlin Gerke. Caitlin leads the Northwoods UX research and strategy teams and genuinely enjoys helping clients, professionals, and students better understand the value of a data-backed marketing approach. She's a skilled marketing strategist certified in Google Analytics, and she has shared her extensive knowledge as an adjunct instructor in information science and technology at UW-Milwaukee. Caitlin appreciates a good puzzle and finds the fun in using data to solve a client's unique set of challenges. When she's not at Northwoods, she loves to travel and enjoys board games. So you are in great hands this morning. So with all that, I'm now going to turn things over to Caitlin.
All right. Thanks, Jim. And good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start things off with a bit of a kind of analogy that we'll be using throughout the presentation today. And that is comparing your website to a house. There's a lot of similarities, oddly, in maintaining a home as well as maintaining a website. The biggest one being if your house has an issue, you have really two options. You can either pack up and move to a new house. Maybe you realize it completely doesn't fit with what you need, or you can look at fixing the problems. You can add a new coat of paint, you can tear down a wall, add a new wall, build a closet, etc. And really the same thing works for your website. If you're having problems with your website, you can either start from scratch, build a brand new website, start over, or you can look at ways of making small changes and small improvements that will help improve your site over time. And I think more often than needed, people will focus on the redesign of starting from completely scratch, starting over, when in reality, they could have either avoided that redesign or could just completely avoid it right now if they would have taken the time to do some smaller updates along the way. So really, this is what we're going to talk about here today. The biggest thing is the reason why this occurs, in my opinion, is because of a kind of a different mindset that people have to the overall user experience. And that is that we often think of user experience as something that you do and then exists on your site. Maybe you're building a brand new website, you do some research, you decide that this is what you need to do to build a new site. You put that site out into the world and you're like, great, we have a good user experience on this website. But in reality, once that site is live, your user experience process isn't over. User experience is really a continuous process. Once we get a website live, it's all about continuing to learn about your site, continuing to learn about what your users need on your site, and making sure that you keep all of that in mind throughout the time that you're managing that website to keep an eye on your overall user experience. Every little change that you make, both on your website, to your business, to the industry at large, can impact your website's user experience. And some of those are a bit more obvious than others. If you think about when you add some additional content to your site, I'll show some examples of this in a little bit, but you add a couple more paragraphs and you add a few more pages, that's slowly changing your navigation. It's slowly changing the way that page is viewed by users and can impact how the page layout is effective for your users and other kind of similar issues that people might have when coming to your site because that content wasn't there when you did that original strategy. It can also be influenced by advertising campaigns or search engine optimization. The mindset that someone has when they come into your site, if that is different than what you expected it to be, might impact your user experience, might impact how easy it is for them to do things on your site if they're looking for one thing and maybe the site isn't matching up with that experience they're looking for. Technology updates are also a big one. Say you've added some new tools to your site or you've added a new plugin to handle something. Whether or not that experience is easy for users is something that you'd want to keep an eye on. But beyond just the technology side of things and beyond the actual changes to your website, there are larger changes that can impact your user experience on your site as well. Things like adding new team members. At a basic level, you want to make sure the website is updated to, reflect the team members if that's something that you do on your site. But it also changes how that person might impact your company. Maybe it's allowing you to expand into a new product line. Or maybe that person is updating the website themselves and how they make updates to the website might be different than how you have in the past. And that might impact the user experience of the site in general. If you have updates to your business, if you expand product lines, if you buy a new business, you want to make sure that that's reflected on the website. And all of those changes could impact the overall user experience. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. Websites in general see changes just from the web. Google algorithm updates change how your site might show up in Google search results. Things like additional concerns about privacy or additional legislation about privacy might change what you need to be doing on your site as well to remain compliant. And then finally, industry updates. Maybe your industry is now focusing on one thing more than others, making sure that your website reflects that and making sure that users who are looking for that information are able to find it on your website. All of these things can cause changes to your site. Maybe some of them are expected, maybe some of them aren't. And the biggest thing is making sure that you know which of these things is actually causing an impact on the users coming to your website and whether they can still do what they need to do on your site. The other thing that's tricky about user experience and why it can sometimes become missed is that user experience isn't something where it changes overnight. User experience really degrades slowly. And so while it seems like a one little change here and there isn't actually making that big of a difference, it actually can slowly become a bigger deal over time. Now, I think forms are a great way to visualize this. Say you've got this great contact us form on the site. It's super short, easy to fill out. With forms, we're always looking for what is the quickest way we can get someone's information and then get them out because people don't want to spend a ton of time filling out a form, right? So in this one, great. We got their name, email, phone, submit, quick, less than 30 seconds. So say someone comes to you and they're like, well, we should add a comment box. We should find out why they're filling out this form. Well, that feels pretty harmless. Sure, add an optional comment box. They could still skip it and then we'll still get the form submission. Best case, they fill it out. We get a little bit more info from them before we actually reach out. Well, then say someone on maybe your sales team comes forward. It's like, it'd be really good to know what their company size is. Let's just add a drop down for that. So you add a little drop down that says select all these company sizes. It's like, it's just one additional step, right? It's one additional drop down. Well, then someone comes to you and says, let's add an address. And you can see where this goes. Suddenly your nice little quick form gets kind of expanded into this much more complicated thing slowly over time. This could be years from when this form was initially launched. And each step feels like a pretty harmless thing to add. But because this kind of compounds over time, it actually can become a big impact on your user experience and can even cause people to fill out your forms less. So things to keep in mind, user experience isn't something that changes overnight. Typically, it's something that slowly changes. And catching it early is going to help make sure that your user experience isn't impacted by these things in the long run. So let's talk about these things. We're going to start off by talking about that first big concern. When is it time to do a redesign? And when is it something that you can do via ongoing updates? We obviously don't want to not do a redesign if that's something that's absolutely necessary to solve the problem. But next, we're going to focus on how do we do this? How do we address those concerns over time? What are the things to be looking out for in terms of things that could cause a general user experience concern? We're also going to talk about monitoring your user experience. Again, things to watch how we do that, how we put that in place. And then finally, talk a high level about how you can maintain a better user experience through this process. So let's start at the beginning. when are there things you can do via a full website redesign, and when are things better to be done on a more ongoing basis? Before we jump into that, let's talk at a very basic level what user experience is. We've been kind of dancing around it, but let's put it in a clear definition so that we're all on the same page going forward. Obviously, UX, user experience, and really this nails down to a combination of both research and web design. Getting information about your users, about your website's performance, and then applying that to the design and outward appearance of your website. On the research side, we're looking at things like what do users need? What's working on your site? What doesn't work on your site? And getting an understanding of whether your site is functioning in a way that your users need it to enable to accomplish their tasks. We're really focused on the needs of the people coming to your site and making sure that they can do everything that they need to do to meet both their goals and the goals of your business. On the design side, we're looking at how those goals and how that research is actually played out physically on the site. And that typically includes things like page layout, where the content is, where the buttons are, what color they are, how big things are and things like that. And general web design. Again, what are the colors on the site? Are the colors doing things to help that process or harm that process? How is imagery being used? Things like that. How all of those kind of things that you want to do are actually organized and displayed on the site, and whether that's doing what you need it to do from both a branding and user experience perspective. So before we jump in to kind of this whole thing, let's talk a little bit about what you guys are doing on your sites right now. So right now, are you doing anything to monitor those two things, research-wise or design-wise? Are you monitoring your website's user experience on a regular basis? Yes, no, maybe partially. Maybe it's something that you're doing occasionally, but maybe you don't have a full process set up. And maybe unsure. Maybe you're gathering some data, you're not sure if it actually relates to UX or if it's sort of something other than UX that you're looking at. All right, so we've got 17% saying, yes, you're doing this. Great, you're on the right track. We'll talk about how to use that great data and move it forward. 8% saying no. Well, here's some great tips on how to get started. A lot of you, 58%, are saying partially. So you're maybe looking at things occasionally, which is a great start. Hopefully this will give you some ideas on how to do that on a regular basis and the benefits of that. And then about 17% saying that you're unsure. Hopefully this will give you some more clarity and again, some kind of ways to move forward with that as well. All right, I've got one more question before we keep going. And that is, do you feel confident in identifying potential user experience issues from your website data? This one's just a simple yes, no, unsure. All right, we're an even split, 38% for both for yes and no. Okay, great. And then 23% unsure. So yeah, perfect. Good place to start. Some of you feeling pretty good about it. Some of you feeling maybe less sure about it. Hopefully this gives you a little bit more parameters to work under as you are kind of looking at that data going forward. Gives you some ideas to start with, which is awesome. So let's talk about the redesign. When is it time to pack up your website and start scratch with something new? A big one is navigation, and I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but navigation really can become a much larger issue than it sometimes even appears to be. If your navigation is really not working, if there's major changes to be made to your navigation, it's usually a sign that it's probably a good idea to start from scratch. And again, I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Maybe you've made major changes to your product offerings or the business direction. You've got lots of content to change. You need to change over tons of products. You need to take a bunch of stuff off the site, add a bunch of new stuff to the site. Probably is going to lead to some navigation changes. In addition to that, you've got big branding changes. You've got all these major business changes going on. Probably a good idea to kind of look at things holistically and maybe start from scratch. Or probably the one that we see the most often as a very, very clear sign that it's time to start over is technology. Your technology is very out of date. It's not working for you. Or your design is very out of date. And the effort it would take to overhaul your design is not something that you could probably do on your current platform. Basically, if it's been a while since you've made some major updates to your site, it's probably time to kind of start from scratch, overhaul everything, and get you back up to a design and a technology stack that can better accommodate what you're looking for. So if we talk about navigation, if we go back to our kind of analogy of your website being a house, the reason why navigation is so crucial is that your navigation is basically the studs of your house. It's what everything else is built upon. Knowing how your pages are organized, how users can move around your site, that is really the core of what your website's user experience is. Obviously, we care a ton about what the page layout and the design and all the other stuff on the page, the content. But if your navigation is broken, people aren't going to find those pages anyway. And so really the page layout doesn't matter if people aren't even getting to those pages. And again, like we were talking about before with kind of little changes adding up over time, navigation is similar. Really, what we see with navigation is one change on the site can add a pretty big ripple effect that can impact so many other things on the website very quickly. So here's an example. You've got this website. I'll be bringing in this fictional website throughout the presentation. Basically, it's a company that sells sports equipment, tennis rackets and badminton equipment and table tennis, racket sports, basically. And let's say you have this business and you're going to add a new line that's aimed at children. You want to add some smaller sizes, maybe add some more brighter colors, things like that that are clearly aimed at children. So you add a new page to your site with your markets. Maybe you even add a couple products onto the pages that you've already got. But really the goal is we're going to add a whole new page talking about all the stuff we do in this new market. Well, adding that page, great. You're probably going to need to also change your markets page because your markets page likely kind of over talks about all of the things you do in all these different markets. You're probably going to add your new market to that. It also might mean that you need to expand your resources. Say you need to add more manuals, more videos to target these other different, very unique product line. Might mean that you have to update those types of resources and the overall resources page on the site as well. Say as part of this, you even want to add a wholesale division. You can add that on. It's just one single page. All of this kind of, you begin to see how it ripples, impacts the home page as well. And even beyond this, you're probably also adding things to the product pages, probably maybe even updating your about page to reflect the new business direction. And in reality, we started with adding maybe 1 or 2 pages, and we're updating pages across the website. So again, navigation changes can really ripple into additional content efforts, additional reorganization. In addition, if you add a bunch of new products, it might mean that you need to reorganize your product section. So just adding things can make changes over time. And that's really where we start to see navigation fall apart, is that it hasn't been updated or analyzed over time. Typically, when you launch a site, you have a pretty solid navigation. But as new pages get added, things get moved around, that's where you slowly start to see some changes in your navigation and things tend to start to get a little bit messy and users begin to struggle with actually finding things. So really, whenever there's major navigation problems, we probably want to take a look at things holistically and see, can this be something that's solved by just moving a couple pages around? Or if it's been a while, more likely, do we need to kind of start from scratch, move things around and start over? The other big one being technology. Technology is sort of the, while navigation maybe could be fixed by a couple of small updates, technology and design are the things that if you're having problems, it's definitely time to redesign. Signs that you might be having some technology issues are things like you have extensive effort needed to make updates. Maybe you just want to add a little bit of content to a page and it takes you an hour because you have to work through all these different steps, maybe bring in an outside vendor to make those simple types of changes. You can't do a lot of that on your own. Signs that you probably don't need to be spending that much effort to be making those types of website updates. Time consuming is another big thing. If things that should be really simple are taking a lot of effort and a lot of time, you could probably be spending your time more useful elsewhere and might be a sign that it's time to start from scratch. The other big side of this is expensive to operate. If it's just really expensive to run that website. Obviously, some sites that are super complicated are going to cost more to run than others. But especially if you have a relatively simple website, it's taking a ton of effort, a ton of time, a ton of money to make changes. It might make sense to kind of start from scratch, make the investment now, and save you both time and effort and money in the process in the long term. But we're not going to talk about redesigns for this webinar. For the most part, we're going to talk about how do we do this over time. So say you've ruled things out. Maybe you've just recently launched a brand new website and you want to make sure that you maintain your UX over time. Or maybe you have been kind of making small changes. You know the technology is solid. You feel pretty good about your navigation beyond maybe a couple of tiny things, but you want to make sure that you maintain that UX and solve other small problems. This is where incremental updates can really help you out on the UX side. When we're talking about ongoing updates, we're looking at things like this, like you've made a minor change to your product line. probably a sign that you need to take a look at your site and see if the site can be optimized to better show off that product line. You want to update your colors or your imagery on a small scale. Honestly, even on a slightly larger scale, there's things you can do on a more incremental level rather than starting from scratch on that side of things. You want to make some small technology or functionality changes. I'll show an example of that in a little bit. Or there was a concern identified from your website data. What this really boils down to is if there's business dictated things like you've changed your products, you've changed your branding, you've changed things like that are a sign that you probably need to go check on your website, or the more complicated side of things, which is data dictated things that came up from the data that you're already collecting that are a sign that you need to take a closer look at something on your site. We're going to start off with the slightly easier one, the business dictated things that you've learned about just through the way your business operated that are kind of a little bit of a red flag that you need to go check on your website. Product offerings is probably what we see the most often in these types of things. So if we go back to our racket sports company, say that they have made a deal and have partnered with or purchased a company, and they've now got all sorts of different sports. They're adding in kind of the ball sports, the soccer, basketball, etc. type of sports, and they want to add those products onto the site. Now, this is a big enough change that we might want to even do a redesign. If we're looking at that old navigation that we had, we're adding on a bunch of new products. We know that's going to impact the products page, the home page, possibly resources and the markets and things like that. That might be a sign that we need to take a step back and do a redesign. But more likely, if you're doing that type of a thing, maybe you're only adding on one product line or a slight change in your products, or you're expanding your product line. Well, in that case, that can be addressed by just adding content to a single page. We don't need to add more pages, most likely. That's something that can be done on a much more incremental basis, and something that we can take a look at and see what's the best way to incorporate that without impacting the user experience. On the design side, things like wanting to make minor branding updates, maybe switching out a color in your branding or updating imagery. If you've done maybe a photo shoot on site, you've got some new photography, or you've got a graphic designer who's made some new assets, some updated graphics or things like that. All things that can be done on a more incremental basis. Maybe you've got a new logo you want to show off. The biggest thing is that you don't have a major impact on the overall design of the site. You've got little things you're changing out, but for the most part, the site can stay relatively the same, just with a couple little tweaks here and there. On the technology side here, we're looking at, again, smaller technology changes. So we're not actually altering the underlying content management system or anything of the site. We're more looking at little things we can be added to the site from a technological basis. So say you've got an engineer who has this great idea for a new kind of tool, a calculator they want to add to the site. Well, that's a technology change. We've got to get this calculator on the site, alter kind of the layout of the pages, but it's something that can be done through maybe a change to a page or a couple of pages, not something that's going to impact the site as a whole. It's something we can do more incrementally. The bigger changes are the data dictated changes. These are the things that maybe you don't know are happening. On the business side, you know that there was a change. It's probably a sign that you need to go and make some small updates to your website to accomplish that. Maybe keep an eye on the data afterward to see how it's performing. But the data dictated website updates are the things that you aren't expecting, the things that just kind of happen and that you need to react to and understand their impact on your site as a whole. Now, where this data comes from can be a lot of different places. And like Jim mentioned at the beginning, these are things that you might already be doing on your site. Things like Google Analytics. Google Analytics being kind of the easiest way, the cheapest, it's free way to track your website performance. If you don't have Google Analytics set up on your site, I highly, highly recommend it, or having some sort of analytics tool that allows you to see page traffic, where people are kind of moving throughout your site, how long they're staying on pages, things like that. They'll let you kind of get an understanding of how people are using your site at a basic level. Once you've got kind of that basics down, you can start looking at other ways to enhance that data. My biggest thing that I recommend the most in terms of a next step is heat maps. The two players out there that we interact with the most are Microsoft Clarity and Hotjar. Clarity is totally free. We actually use Clarity the most to understand how your site's performing and where people are clicking on different pages. I highly recommend it. Hotjar is also a great tool that has some additional bells and whistles that you can use. That again, both are great. I'll show examples of heat maps in just a couple of slides. On the SEO side, looking at your search engine optimization, which we're not going to touch on too much in this presentation, but is a great thing to keep an eye on and might give signs that your site is either excelling or struggling in certain ways. Google Search Console is, again, a free tool, good place to start to see how your site is being viewed by users, what pages are getting traffic from Google, and things like that. And there's plenty of other tools out there that are paid, like SEMrush, Ahrefs, things like that, that can give you a little bit more data into that. On the user side, things like running surveys through SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, any of those big survey tools is a great way to get user data. And Playbook UX or other user testing tools can get you some additional user data as well. Again, I'll show examples of these in a little bit. And then finally, having some sort of a website health tool is great. We love Screaming Frog, which lets you scan your site up to a certain number of pages on the free version, at least, that allow you to see where there might be some technical concerns. All of these, I'm going to show examples of in just a little bit, but just so you get an idea of where this data is coming from and things to consider if you're looking at getting some additional data about your website. What you'll probably see the most in here, and the thing that I think can be a huge game changer in terms of understanding your user experience, are heat maps. This is an example of a heat map. And what heat maps do is they let you track engagement and interaction on pages. They typically show that through showing hot and cold zones of interaction. So for example, this is a click heat map. It lets us see where on this page people clicked during the time frame that I set it up for and where they didn't. So anything that gets lots of engagement, in this case clicks, burns red hot. And anything that gets little engagement or no engagement at all is either blue, it's cold, or it's not even lit up at all. In this case, this is a homepage, and it allows us to see where on this homepage people are actually interacting to navigate our website. Navigation is a big thing. Again, we pay a lot of attention to navigation in terms of user experience. And one thing we always want to understand is, how are people even navigating our website? Are they going to the top navigation? Are they clicking on content on the page? Are they going to the search box? And this allows us to see that, hey, there's a lot of clicks on these different items of the top navigation. People are clearly going there very often. There's also, though, a lot of clicks on the on-page content. These buttons are incredibly effective at getting people to those pages, and kind of learn more about that. And we can see that search is used, but maybe not as much as the others. Again, just knowing that is a great place to begin, because it allows us to see over time, is that changing at all? Does that change if we add different content to the page, or if we're advertising something different outside of our website? There's lots of things that it can help teach you. And more than anything, seeing that over time, those changes as you make other changes, or as your business changes, your website changes, your industry changes, can help you to get an idea of how users' needs are changing and how you might be able to adapt those going forward. This is another example of a heat map. This is a scroll heat map. So it lets us see how far down the page people are scrolling before they leave the page. And this is really great for testing and monitoring content changes, as well as making sure that the content you have on the page is reflective of what you want users to understand about you. So in this case, we know from our data that this average drop-off point, the average point when people leave this page, is about where I'm pointing, kind of right by the green, blue. About 50% of people have left the page by that point. What that's really helpful for is then we can look at the content above that and say, does this actually say what I want it to say about me? Is this content optimized for what I want someone to know when they come to this page? And if it's not, if the really important thing is down in the blue area, that might be a sign that we need to move things around and see how that changes after we've done that in the future, or how that heat map might change after we've made those changes. The other thing is looking at the design impact of your pages. This is one of my favorite kind of things that I was not expecting to get from data that impacted a website's user experience. So this is on a nonprofit-based website, and this is just one of their headings on their pages. And in this case, we were using user testing. So for this website, once a year, we go in and we get a random assortment of users through our tool, Playbook UX, to complete a user test. These users are people who have probably not been on this website before, but are in the target demographic that this organization is trying to reach. And we just ask them to complete tasks on the site. We ask them to show how you'd make a donation, show how you'd learn more about the ways you can give to this organization. Just a nice way to see someone who's never been here before, but does meet the criteria of who we'd want to be on the site, and see if there's any hiccups that they run into while trying to do this. So they were doing this on a desktop computer, and multiple users in this study said that based on the way that this dotted line heading item looked, they thought they could scroll from side to side. And so we could see this, that users were literally trying to drag their mouse and scroll to the side. They thought there were more options coming, but that was not how this page worked at all. Just a little thing like that can cause a hiccup in their user experience. They think they can do something, but they can't. They might get frustrated, or it kind of takes their mindset away from the important content on the page because they're trying to do something and they're trying to figure out why it's not working. So all we had to do was get rid of that line, and suddenly that page is more effective because people aren't getting distracted by this thing that they can't actually do on the page. For me, this is an awesome example of data pointing to little changes that can improve your user experience. Say this is on every page on the site. That's something that improves the user experience of all of those pages that design element is changed. And with websites, we have so little time to grab someone's attention. The average time that someone spends on a website is like less than 2 minutes for the entire time they're on the site. Typically, you've got only a couple of seconds to grab their attention before they're about to jump off the site or jump to a different page or jump off the site entirely. So every little hiccup like that we can improve helps keep their attention on the things we want them to keep their attention on and not get them distracted on something else. The other great thing about little things like this is that this is only one issue, but say there were other issues on the site, other little things. Again, another example of how things can compound and add up and cause issues in user experience as a whole that could have been fixed through little tiny updates here and there instead. Another great thing, again, we're going back to heat maps here, is checking on your calls to action. So in this case, we're looking at this site and we know where on the pages, when people get here, we know where we want them to click once they get here. In this case, it works out. These are the primary calls to action on these pages. People are clicking on them. Perfect. That's exactly what we want them to be doing. On another example, we did a similar study, in this case, again, through user testing, something where we asked users to come to the site and complete those tasks. And in this example, we asked them to come to this page and tell us where on this page they would click next to learn more. So there's lots of calls to actions here. We've got a watch to learn more, a bunch of links in the text, a fund your donation here, download your kit. But what we wanted them to do was to click on this view my guide under the start today on the side here. So we asked all of the users to come to this page, tell us what you do next. And out of all the calls to action, that was the only one that wasn't even mentioned as a thing that they wanted to do next on the site, which is obviously not what we wanted to see, but is great data for us to look at the layout of this page, move some things around, and try again with a different page layout and see if we can make some improvements to that user experience. Again, this is something that we never, we obviously had a suspicion that there were a lot of things grabbing their attention, that there are a lot of different things that they might want to do on this page, but it's great confirmation that this is something worth spending our time on and an issue that people aren't finding what we want them to find. So let's reorganize the page, focus our time on this to get them to find what we want them to find and do what we want them to do next. The other great thing is we can check on content performance. So this is our website, and this is another example of a heat map, even though it doesn't look that way. What this is doing is it's a version of an area heat map. These are available in Microsoft Clarity. And what we can do is we can say, hey, look at all of these different little drop-down menus. If you've ever been on our website, on our services pages, we've got these little drop-downs where you can click on the plus sign and learn more about that service we offer. So in this case, we're saying, hey, look at all these little boxes. Which of these are getting the most engagement? Which of these are getting clicked on the most often on our site? And so we can look through and say, okay, yeah, some of these get, of all the users coming to the page, they get 8% of the on-page clicks, 9% of the on-page clicks, 0% of the on-page clicks. And for us, what that's really helpful for, in addition to checking on just purely effectiveness of the page, it also lets us know a little bit what people are even interested in when they come to our site. Is that heading appealing to them? Is that something that they want to learn more information about? Or are there other things people want to learn more about? Are there ways we can better move things around and try again later? So again, with having so little time to grab someone's attention on a website, little things like this, like adjusting wording, moving things around to best meet what people are looking for, or to better highlight things that we think that they should know more about, that is important to us, that we want to see if we can show is important to our users, is again something that you can really greatly be helped with data that points us in the direction of what's working and what isn't. So in addition to just optimizing your content on the page, getting an idea of what's working, what's not, testing out things, technical concerns is the other big thing. Many times I have seen websites that are coming in for a full redesign because they've got so many technical issues that it's just not worth taking the time to fix them. They want to start from scratch. And these are technical things that aren't going back to the actual core of the website. They aren't things that are being impacted by how the website is built or the underlying technology or anything like that. It's things that have kind of slowly built up over time and become a major issue when they maybe didn't need to be if they would have been fixed earlier. These are things like broken links, like 404 errors on your site, large imagery that kind of builds up over time. It can take a long time to clean up if you've got too many large images that are slowing down the performance of your site. Or things like missing alt text that are impacting accessibility, other like little tiny technical changes. And again, these things can compound and add up over time. In terms of broken links, they can impact lots of pages as well. Jim alluded to this in the introduction, but we worked with a client who had one incorrect link in their footer, and that meant that all 600 pages of their website had a 404 error on them. Any page someone went to on their site, if they clicked that link in the footer, it would have been broken. So if they, caught that, we caught that very early for them. They were able to go in, make that change, and now that change is fixed. But imagine if that had compounded. There was that one in the footer, there was another one on this page, another one on that page. Suddenly, instead of going in and fixing one broken link, they've got maybe hundreds of broken links on the site that they have to go in and manually figure out what's an issue and what's not. This happens a lot, and it's something that can be very easily fixed if those changes can be caught early. The other side of getting user data is, and in addition to the quantitative data, the data that we get just from how people are interacting with their site, is learning about what users want by just directly asking them. This is something that Hotjar does really well, that you can basically have a little pop-up survey that pops up on the site. Now, we've probably all seen these. They pop up in the corner of the site and they say, tell us about your experience today, or do you have any feedback for us? And there's a lot of ways to do this well and a lot of ways to do this poorly. But basically, the core advice is to keep it as simple as possible, as easy to fill out as possible. So in this case, we asked users, did you find what you were looking for today on the site? And in the period that we were running this for, 15 people said yes and 10 said no. We asked them maybe one additional follow-up question. And in both cases, they were asked to leave a comment. So in the no's, they were asked to basically tell us what you were looking for. And in this case, they said there should be better mapping of historical disease subtypes in one document. This is something that obviously me on the website don't know what this means, but it's something that I can go and reach out then to the subject matter expert. They can talk through that and see if there's changes that they can make to their documentation that better meets what that user was looking for, especially if we're getting similar comments from users on the website or even similar comments coming in through customer feedback. It's ways to kind of identify things that are an issue from what users are actually experiencing and encouraging them to tell us what things are working and what aren't. On the same side, asking them what worked for them, if there were any positive things they liked about the site. In this case, same survey, somebody who did find what they're looking for said it was helpful to find a person's email address. So in this case, we knew, hey, it's good that we had those email addresses in there. Probably shouldn't get rid of those, especially for getting that comment multiple times. And looking at other ways that we can make it easy for users to better contact someone when they need help. Again, just a way to understand why someone's coming to the site and if what our site was doing better meets their needs. The complicated thing about user experience is that it's really in two parts. The data that we get showing where people are clicking, what they're doing on the site, things like that is great for letting us know exactly what's happening. We know what pages they're going to, we know where they're clicking, and we can make inferences from that about how their experience worked and whether things were easy for them or difficult for them. But we can't know exactly unless they tell us. So any chance that we have to get feedback from actual people, either through running user testing where we actually have real people accomplishing tasks on the site, or just leaving openings for them to give feedback, either through sending out a yearly survey, having pop-up surveys on the site so it gets them when they're in that moment. Anything we can do to get context, really the why behind what's actually happening, is going to give us a more full picture of what's happening on the site and allow us to make better updates and better changes to the site to best meet those users' needs going forward. So keeping an eye on this over time, how do we make sure we're monitoring the right things? Some of you I know said that you maybe are partially checking things, or you want to keep an eye on things better going forward. Here's some tips to help make that more easy. The first thing I always recommend is going back to what you want your website to do for you. If we go to the nonprofit example, probably the biggest thing that a nonprofit website often wants is to gain donations, maybe through the website, maybe through events, etc. And going back to how do we track to see if that's actually happening on the website? If we're actually looking at online donations, there's a few very clear things. Are people even clicking on our donate button? How many total donations have we gotten? And how much was donated through the website? Even looking at things like, are people signing up for events? Are they clicking on the pages that we want them to click on? Things like that. Whatever we can do to provide some sort of proof that what we want them to do on the site is actually being done on the site is what we want to try and start by making sure that we're tracking. Also making sure that what we're tracking aligns with what others in our organization might be looking for, in particular your leadership. They might be interested in different things than what you're interested in. So making sure we've got everything set up to track that effectively. Really, there's the basic stuff with Google Analytics, but this is also a good chance to see, are you tracking in enough different ways? Maybe adding some heat maps in and keeping an eye on whether people are clicking on the thing you want them to click on. Maybe adding in a yearly survey if you're not completely sure of users' intentions when they come to your site or just want some clarification on that. All different good things you can do to best make sure that you're accomplishing those goals that you have. And the biggest thing is keeping an eye on it as well. So making sure that you're monitoring things on a regular basis. Now, what regular means is going to differ based on your team size, your company, your needs for your website. If your website is something that's very heavily a part of your marketing strategy and gets a lot of traffic, you probably want to keep an eye on that on a more regular basis, maybe even monthly or more often than that. Other companies, quarterly is totally fine. The important thing is to make sure that you're keeping an eye on it on a semi-regular basis. I would say quarterly being the kind of lowest common denominator there. I would say at least quarterly. At least check on your website 4 times a year. And again, this is because those things confound. The large images is another thing that I've seen that can get really out of hand really fast. So say you upload one image, it's a little bit too large to your website. Large images can be difficult on your site because the more stuff that's stored on your site, the slower that it runs. And again, we've got only so many seconds before somebody gets frustrated that a page is taking a while to load. Say you don't catch that it's a large image, so you upload another one that's a little bit too big. Site's still performing fine. You don't see any major issues. You upload another one and you see where this is going. Instead of just having to fix one image that's too large and keeping in mind that you should upload smaller images going forward, suddenly you catch it when it becomes a problem and you're manually compressing and re-uploading dozens to hundreds of images in order to make your website perform more effectively again. Something we don't want to happen, and things like that happen a lot on websites. The other thing is to look out for when you might want to conduct some additional research. Typically, this is when we start to see the user research come in. Either maybe you get a sign that it'd be nice to maybe run a survey of your users, maybe do a playbook UX study or other type of user testing research to understand where people who haven't been on your site are clicking. Best case scenario is you set a plan to maybe do this yearly. It can be really helpful. And even if you aren't doing it on a regular basis, looking for signs that it might be good data to have. So for example, this was someone we worked with that we're starting to get some interesting comments from users via their customer support and other things like that it was difficult to find products on their site. And they wanted to know if it was something that needed a full overhaul. Is this a major navigation issue, or is this a one-off thing, something we can fix pretty quickly? So we ran a survey and got some different answers. In one case, we heard you have to do 8 clicks to get somewhere. Most people are never going to do that. On the other side, we got comments saying, I actually kind of like the way things are laid out. It's helpful for me to see all the products like this in one place. It's a good reminder of what you actually have available. Okay, different answers. There are probably some different things we'd want to take a look at to make sure that the navigation is meeting the needs of both users. So probably an overhaul to take a look at things. But if we were getting really similar comments from all people, it might point that only this one area needs to be updated or something like that. So getting that additional context, spending the time to get just a little bit of additional data can help make sure that you're spending your effort in the right way going forward. The last thing is to keep an eye for warning signs of a larger issue. So running that additional data was a good way to see, do you need to do a full overhaul or can it be fixed quickly? But keeping an eye on those very early things I brought up as like a sign of a major redesign should be coming. So are you making massive changes to your business coming soon? Probably a good idea to factor in time to make sure your website is effective when those changes occur. Are you starting to have some technology issues? Maybe even just small ones or things are taking longer than they used to. Might be a sign to maybe get ahead of that and do a redesign or plan for a redesign in your budgets in the coming years. Are things just starting to take a lot more time to do? Again, technology issue, probably something to keep an eye on. And finally, has it just been a while? Even if you are incrementally making updates to your site, and the site's performing okay, technology changes over time, design trends change over time. If it's been a handful of years, it's probably time to consider a redesign just to keep things up to date, both on the technology side and the design side, and get some additional deeper research on your navigation. The nice thing about this is it's much, much easier to update and redesign a site that's already performing well than it is to update a site that isn't performing well. So all of that effort is not wasted, even if you have to do a redesign. It's just going to make it so much easier for you to redesign your site. You've already got good content, you've already got all of this great data about what's working and maybe where some little issues occur. So you'll know exactly the types of things that you need to change. And you won't have to do a ton of that effort during the redesign process because you've taken the time to do the right thing and keep your site functioning well over time instead. So even if it's time for a redesign, it's going to be a much easier redesign than maybe some of the others where sites are maybe not working as well and you've got to do a little bit more of an overhaul. So all of this leads to maintaining a user experience is better than fixing it. Really, we often will think about UX and user experience with a website as something that you do in the very beginning. And it's crucial to the beginning of a website project. We do need to, if we're launching a new website, do some research, decide the direction to go on, make sure it applies to the design. But we need to pay attention to it after your website is launched as well. UX is a full process. It is an ongoing circle. Just because you do UX at the beginning of a website project does not mean that your UX is now good to go and over. In fact, if you think you're ahead on UX, you're probably already behind. The trouble with doing only UX at the beginning of a website project is that in the 6 months to a year that it takes after that research is done, you haven't gotten new research. So that data is already out of date once your site goes live. It just makes it so important to make sure that you have a plan to keep an eye on your user experience once that site is live and to be ready to make little tweaks and changes once your new site is live, even if you did an extensive user research project at the beginning of the site. Really, it's just a way of making sure that you have maintaining the investment that you've already made in UX. UX is constantly changing. The internet is constantly changing, as we all know. Making sure that you set aside time to maintain your website is just going to make sure that you are maintaining the investment you've already made and keeping your website functioning for many years to come going forward. So in terms of maintaining your user experience, launching a site is not the end. Make sure you set up a plan to monitor it based on the needs of your site, based on the needs of your users. Again, if you've got lots of people using your site, lots of content, you're making changes all the time, people are coming to your site all the time, probably something that you want to do more often. Versus if your site is a lesser part of your marketing strategy, maybe quarterly is totally fine. Maintain that experience is always better than fixing it. You're always going to save time if you know those little changes versus waiting for them to compound into a bigger issue. This allows you to catch those things before they even become a major issue and save you tons of time. And really with UX, a little effort can go a long way. just making sure you've got tracking set up, making sure you're keeping an eye on your data, just making sure things are still working properly can do a lot in terms of making sure your site is functioning well so you can make those little changes and not wait until they compound to become a much larger issue and takes you a lot more time in the future. So with that, I'm going to open it up to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Really appreciate that great information. We did get a question or two during the webinar, which was great. And we also had some questions that were submitted during registration. Let me get to those first. The first question that we received is, what are some strategies for approaching content owners who are not engaging in the review process? I have
Mhm.
some thoughts on that, but I'll let you start off.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, that can be really challenging, especially if you've got multiple content authors, different subject matter experts making changes on your site. You have a lot more control about what you do and how you make those changes, but sometimes policing them can be difficult. The things that I can recommend are keeping them involved in the process. So it can be sometimes helpful for users or for content authors to see the changes, the impact that their changes make. So making sure that they have access to the data, they can see the impact that the website performance has on the overall success of your marketing and even the overall success of their segment of the business can be really effective, as well as making sure that you set up some sort of a governance plan. So you have someone who's in charge of kind of overseeing them. Where things can sometimes fall apart is when, you kind of train someone and they kind of go off on their own unmonitored. So making sure that there is someone whose role it is to keep an eye on them, to keep on top of them, and to continuously kind of keep an eye on the governance of their portion of the site. Jim, you said you had some thoughts as well.
Yeah, just extending on that governance, measurement drives behavior. And so if you have a team of people who are responsible for this, one of the best ways to ensure accountability is to write it into their job description. We work with large systems, intranets and extranets, and content freshness and keeping up to date with that is a challenge for everybody. So if you write that, you make that part of their measurement, you make that part of their job description. That's another way of ensuring that they're going to participate and stay engaged with the content as you go.
Yep.
I'm looking at the Q&A here. What do we have? An open question. What is your best tip for making the business case for investing time and money in UX and website updates?
Also very tricky. I would say go back to what your leadership wants to see. This is a lot easier if your leadership has an understanding of the website and, cares about certain things on the site. You can show them either that things are maybe not performing the way they'd like them to, or that they are and that you need to maintain that. So keeping an eye on the metrics they want to track on the site, but also finding ways to tie it back to your overall business performance. Anytime we can tie things back to actual conversions, whether that is if you sell online or do something there, you can clearly see the signups for something online, showing how spending a little bit of additional time can help improve those, or even just tying it back to pure leads, showing that the website drove this many leads. Maybe ask for a trial period to invest some time in that and show hopefully an increase in leads during that time. Anything where you can tie it back to data is something that can be really effective. Another thing that we've seen effective is bringing in a third party. So sometimes it can be helpful if it's not coming directly from you, if it's coming from a third party, again, getting the money to invest in that can be difficult. But if there's ways to kind of incorporate a separate party who can kind of validate your thoughts, that can sometimes be helpful as well.
Excellent. Thank you. And we have time for one more question here. What is the importance of making certain images clickable on product category pages?
Category pages. Yeah, so I would go back to heat maps. If you're having questions about what should be clickable and what shouldn't be clickable on a site, get some heat maps running. Again, Clarity is totally free. Hotjar has, I think, still has a free version. Get a couple months of click data. And the biggest sign for me is if I see someone clicking on something that I know doesn't do anything. We see that a lot on product pages in particular. If there are cards and only the text is clickable and the image is not something that right now on your site does anything, if it's clicked on, you'll see people clicking on that image. And if it's happening a lot, you probably should make it clickable. So again, heat maps, one of my favorite things to have running on a site. Anytime you see someone clicking on something that doesn't actually click, it's probably time to make it clickable. So
Thank you, Caitlin. And that's all the time we have for questions today. Thank you, everybody, for submitting them. Hopefully, we answered a lot of them as we went through the content today. Before we wrap things up, one more thing worth time on your calendar. On Thursday, September 17th, Northwoods is teaming up with Milwaukee law firm Godfrey and Kahn for a special edition webinar entitled CMPs, Cookies, and Compliance: What Legal and Technical Teams Need to Know About Consent Management. As data privacy regulations keep evolving, this session is a timely opportunity for marketers, data analysts, compliance officers, and legal teams alike to get up to speed on the latest trends in data privacy and cookie consent and the technology behind consent. Like all of our webinars, this will be complimentary and it starts at 10 a.m. Central Time. Please learn more and register at learnatnorthwoods.com. And if you're looking for information on a specific topic or just want to stay up to date on the latest trends and developments in the constantly changing world of AI and digital, check out our blog, our recorded webinars, our YouTube channel, and our Around the Campfire podcast featuring casual conversations with our experts on all things AI and digital. And finally, if you'd like to learn more about Northwoods and the many services we offer, from website design and development to custom software and digital marketing to digital advertising and marketing strategy, visit us at nwsdigital.com to explore our services, details, read our client stories, and much, much more. So that concludes our webinar. I'd like to thank Caitlin and each of you for joining us this morning. We look forward to seeing you again in our next webinar. And until then, have a great day, a great rest of your week. Thank you very much.